Immense corporations are the enemies of the people. Their leaderships place profits before people, stock prices before public interest. While that is their right, and our current crooked system permits it, it's our right not to tolerate it and to do something about it. If we don't, we're tacitly contributing to the corrosion of our society and robbing our children of a fulfilling future. American weapons manufacturers flood the world with armaments, giving militants the tools they need to inflict bloody carnage on innocent people who are always victimized in any conflict. Shrewdly, arms companies have dispersed their operations among many states and congressional districts to ensure that their interests are protected not only by one member of Congress who will act to guard jobs in his or her district, but by many. Wars wouldn't erupt if humans were naturally peaceful, but wars wouldn't last so long or kill so many if the world wasn't inundated with weapons paid for by your tax dollars. Even now, militants in the Middle East use American-made guns, missiles, and Humvees to kill their opposition. That Iraq is tantamount to an American arms depot contributed to the success of ISIS and its adherents. But that's not bad news for arms manufacturers. More of their products will need to be purchased to replace the weapons taken by the insurgents. The greed, selfishness, and arrogance of big banks caused the global financial cataclysm whose effects we haven't escaped after nearly 6 years. But according to the US legal system, no one is responsible. Executives of those banks are not. Instead, they've received millions in bonuses. Lower level people are not. They were just following instructions. The world financial system nearly collapsed because of known actions and decisions by big banks. But no one is accountable. Meanwhile, every day, young men, typically of color, are sent to prison for years for possessing a small amount of drugs. The claws of big banks are sunk into every facet of the system. They bankroll campaigns of both parties to ensure that only harmless legislation, or none, affects their interests. Their high-priced legal teams ensure not only that no one goes to jail, but the cases aren't even pursued. And because they suffer no consequences from their misbehavior in the past, they continue to manipulate the murky world of finance using risky and complex innovations that enhance their bottom line at the possible expense of the global economy. Why shouldn't they? After all, if something bad happens to them, the government will rescue them using your money and mine. Pharmaceutical companies are responsible for important breakthroughs that have extended people's lives. But they are also responsible for bleeding Americans dry through the world's highest drug prices and through obstructing fundamental healthcare reform. Obamacare was possible only because of Big Pharma's support. And that was offered only because, at the outset, the Obama administration surrendered to their demands immediately without a fight. At the start, Big Pharma was assured that government would refrain from bargaining for lower prices for medicine, and that purchasing drugs where they are cheaper, like in Canada, would remain prohibited. With Obama's promise that Americans would continue to be ripped off by being trapped into paying exorbitant costs for drugs, unsurprisingly, Big Pharma had no objections to Obamacare. That a new popular president would submit to the outrageous demands of Big Pharma without even a token struggle exposes both the power of that monster and politicians' willingness to feed it, with us as the food. Spineless and/or tainted politicians are the handmaidens of big business who make it all possible by exchanging cash for legislation and votes. The racket is obvious to everyone except the conservatives on the Supreme Court. Campaigns are expensive. Contributions by big business are credited with winning elections. Therefore, a politician will need to keep them again the next election cycle. So better keep them happy, better do what they want, so the money pipeline doesn't freeze or switch to a competitor. Keeping big business happy means acting according to their interests by ensuring the enactment of favorable legislation and by blocking anything unfavorable. There is never a divergence between a politician's positions and those of his or her big business backers. And the fervency of politicians' support is proportionate to the cash they've been given to deliver that support. There is, however, a vast disparity between the interests of big business and the interests of the general public. Bank bailouts, corporate tax loopholes, corporate welfare, cuts in food stamps, cuts in unemployment benefits, giveaways to big pharma, perpetual war, and a tax code that favors the rich all expose in whose interest politicians are acting. This is how the system works. To deny that is either naive or disingenuous. Politicians only care about the interests of whoever is handing them the cash they need to get elected. If that cash was handed over only by the public, that is, if campaigns were required to be funded solely with public funds, then public interest would finally matter. Politicians would feel free to act according to the wishes of the voters rather than that of corporate donors. Perhaps the ultimate enemy of the people is apathy. Right now, the masses seem content to submit to being trampled by the filthy feet of big business and their politician lackeys. We're cooperating in our opposition and our transition from a free and productive people into nothing more than an impotent host for the parasitic 1%. Instead of apathy, there should be righteous anger that sparks action, ignites changes, and consumes the old, decayed, and corrupt system in a conflagration that clears the way for a better one to be built. Flames of change have kindled throughout the world in the past few years. While many citizens in those places still struggle, they've learned a critical lesson that will sustain them. The power of unified people is irresistible, even to the most entrenched dictatorships. Can we apply that lesson? Can we light the fire of rebellion here? Or are we too sopping wet from being waterboarded by our derelict government and its leech like corporate underwriters?